The notification sound from my phone pierced through the quiet of my bedroom at 3:47 a.m., jolting me from the restless sleep that had become my constant companion during these endless weeks of bed rest. My swollen fingers fumbled for the device on my nightstand, squinting at the bright screen that displayed a message I never thought I'd see: account balance alert. Your StreamlineApps business checking account balance is now $127.83. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at the numbers, certain there had to be some mistake. Just yesterday, our account had shown a healthy balance of over $47,000. The money we'd earned from 3 major client launches. This quarter, the funds that were supposed to carry us through the next 6 months while I recovered from this high-risk pregnancy. I refreshed the banking app with shaking hands, hoping the screen would correct itself, that this was some sort of technical glitch. Instead, the numbers stared back at me with cold finality. $46,872 had vanished overnight. Ryan's side of the bed was empty, his pillow undisturbed. He'd mentioned something about staying late at his brother Kevin's place to help with some computer project. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. The recorded message played his familiar voice, cheerful and reassuring, promising to get back to me soon. Under normal circumstances, I might have waited until morning to discuss this crisis. But these weren't normal circumstances. I was 34 weeks pregnant, confined to bed rest due to severe preeclampsia, and now someone had apparently drained my business account while I lay helpless in this bedroom that had become both sanctuary and prison. My name is Jessica Mitchell, though most people call me Jess, and 6 months ago I thought I had everything figured out. At 31, I was the proud owner of StreamlineApps, a mobile application development company I'd built from the ground up over the past 4 years. We specialized in creating custom productivity apps for small to medium-sized businesses. The kind of solutions that helped restaurant owners manage inventory or allowed consulting firms to streamline their client communications. I'd started the company in my spare bedroom with nothing but a laptop, a fierce determination to prove myself in the male-dominated tech world, and about $3,000 in savings. Those early days were a blur of 18-hour workdays, ramen noodle dinners, and the constant anxiety that comes with pouring every ounce of your energy and resources into something that might fail spectacularly. But it didn't fail. By year 2, I'd hired my first full-time developer, Tyler Johnson, a brilliant programmer fresh out of UT who shared my vision of creating intuitive, powerful business tools. By year 3, we'd moved into a sleek co-working space in Austin's thriving tech corridor, complete with exposed brick walls, standing desks, and the kind of artisanal coffee machine that makes entrepreneurs feel like they're really making it. The business had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We had 8 employees now, a diverse team of developers, designers, and project managers who worked mostly remotely but gathered in our downtown office for weekly strategy meetings and collaborative brainstorming sessions. Our client list included everyone from local Austin startups to established companies across Texas and beyond. Ryan and I had met during the company's second year, when StreamlineApps was hired to develop a scheduling application for the marketing firm where he worked as an account manager. He was charming in an understated way, with dark hair that perpetually looked like he'd just run his fingers through it and a laugh that could fill a room without being obnoxious. What attracted me most wasn't his easy smile or the way he remembered small details about our conversations, but how he seemed genuinely interested in my work. Unlike the men I'd dated before, Ryan didn't get that glazed look in his eyes when I talked about user experience design or database architecture. He asked thoughtful questions about my business challenges and celebrated every small victory as if it were his own achievement. When I landed our first major corporate contract, he surprised me with a bottle of champagne and a handwritten card that read, "To the most brilliant woman I know, who's just getting started." We married 18 months later in a small ceremony at Zilker Park, surrounded by friends, family, and several of my employees who had become like family themselves. Ryan's family had welcomed me warmly, or so I thought. His mother Linda was a former school administrator with silver hair. She kept perfectly styled and a way of speaking that made even casual observations sound like pronouncements. His brother Kevin worked in IT for a local hospital system and had that slightly awkward charm common among people who were more comfortable with computers than conversation. His sister Brittany had recently married and moved back to Austin after a few years in Dallas, where she'd worked for a financial planning firm. They seemed like a close-knit family, the kind that gathered for every holiday and birthday, where everyone knew everyone else's business and opinions were shared freely whether requested or not. Coming from a smaller family myself, I found their boisterous dinner conversations and elaborate holiday traditions both overwhelming and endearing. The pregnancy had been a surprise, but a welcome one. Ryan and I had talked about children in abstract terms, something for the future when the business was more established and we'd had time to travel and settle into married life. But when those two pink lines appeared on the test, the theoretical future suddenly became beautifully, terrifyingly real. Everything had been progressing normally until week 28, when my blood pressure began climbing during routine checkups. Dr. Sarah Chen, my obstetrician, initially prescribed modified bed rest, allowing me to work from home while avoiding the stress of commuting and long office days. I'd arranged my bedroom with multiple monitors, a ergonomic keyboard setup, and everything I needed to run StreamlineApps remotely. But when my blood pressure continued to spike and protein appeared in my urine, signaling the onset of preeclampsia, Dr. Chen's recommendations became orders. Complete bed rest. No work stress. Limited visitors. Constant monitoring to ensure both my safety and the baby's. The transition from being the hands-on CEO who knew every detail of every project to being a bedridden observer had been more difficult than I'd anticipated. Are you feeling sick? Should I call Dr. Chen? I held up my phone, the banking app still displaying the catastrophic account balance. Someone stole almost $50,000 from StreamlineApps last night. The color drained from his face. So quickly that for a moment I wondered if I'd misjudged the situation entirely. Maybe he was as shocked as I was. Maybe this was the genuine reaction of a husband discovering that his wife's business had been robbed while she lay helpless in bed. But then I noticed something else. His eyes moved to the phone screen, but there was no confusion about what he was seeing. No questions about which account or how much money. No immediate demand to know how this could have happened or insistence that we call the police immediately. Instead, there was recognition. And fear. That's impossible, he said. Finally, but his voice lacked conviction. There must be some mistake. Maybe a technical error with the bank system. I scrolled through the transaction history, showing him the systematic withdrawals that had occurred over the past 2 weeks. These aren't technical errors, Ryan. These are deliberate transfers made with proper authorization codes. Someone with access to our banking credentials has been stealing from us while I've been stuck in this bed. He took the phone from my hands, studying the screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. This is terrible, Jess. We need to call the bank immediately and report this fraud. They can probably reverse the transactions if we act quickly. His response was perfectly reasonable, exactly what an innocent husband should say upon discovering such devastating news. But something about his delivery felt rehearsed, as if he'd prepared for this conversation and was reciting lines he'd practiced. I've already called the bank, I lied smoothly, watching his face for any telltale reaction. They're conducting an internal investigation, but they said the authorization codes match our security protocols perfectly. Whoever did this had legitimate access to our systems. A muscle in his jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. What does that mean exactly? It means this wasn't a random cyber attack, Ryan. It was someone who knew our banking procedures, someone who had physical or electronic access to our security tokens, someone who understood exactly how much money they could steal before triggering automatic alerts. I paused, letting the implications settle between us. Someone who had been in our house, in our home office, with access to my computer and our financial records. Ryan stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard. You're suggesting this was someone we know. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts based on the evidence. I kept my voice clinical, professional, the same tone I used when presenting technical solutions to clients. The question is whether you're going to help me figure out who had this level of access to our systems, or whether you already know. He turned from the window, and for a split second, I saw something raw and desperate in his expression before he composed himself. Of course I'll help you figure this out. We're in this together, Jess. I'm as shocked and angry about this as you are. But he wasn't. That was becoming clearer with every word he spoke. An innocent person would be furious, demanding immediate action, asking detailed questions about how such a theft could occur. Ryan was being careful, measured, almost as if he was trying not to say anything that might complicate an already delicate situation. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Nicole. I'd sent her an emergency text an hour earlier, asking her to check all our other business accounts and contact our bank as soon as they opened. Ryan's eyes fixed on the caller ID with an intensity that confirmed my growing suspicions. Jess? Thank God you're awake. Nicole's voice was tight with anxiety when I answered. I've been at the office since 6 checking everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Someone with intimate knowledge of our financial systems had systematically emptied our account while I lay bedridden and helpless just floors away. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a random cyber attack by strangers halfway around the world. This was personal, planned, and executed by someone who had detailed knowledge of StreamlineApps' financial structure and access to our secure information. Someone who knew I was confined to bed rest and unable to monitor our accounts as closely as usual. Someone who had been preparing for this theft while presenting themselves as a loving support system during my most vulnerable time. I thought about Kevin's increasingly frequent technical support visits, his insistence on upgrading our security systems, and his unrestricted access to my computer and network equipment. I considered Linda's pointed questions about the business, finances, and her concern about our family's future security. I remembered Brittany's offer to review our financial planning and her detailed interest in our banking arrangements. The pieces began forming a picture that should have been obvious weeks ago, but that I'd been too trusting, too grateful for family support, and too distracted by pregnancy complications to recognize. The Mitchell family hadn't been helping us prepare for our financial future. They'd been positioning themselves to steal it. My hands were trembling as I began documenting everything I could think of that might be relevant to understanding how this theft had occurred. Every technical support session Kevin had conducted, every financial conversation with Linda or Brittany, every time my computer had experienced unexplained problems or my internet connection had been mysteriously interrupted. I took screenshots of the banking transactions, noting the dates, times, and authorization codes for each withdrawal. I began drafting emails to Nicole, Tyler, and our accountant Patricia Moore, alerting them to the theft and asking them to secure any other business accounts or financial information that might be vulnerable. But as I worked, a cold fury began building alongside the shock and betrayal. The Mitchell family had watched me struggle with the challenges of bed rest, had seen my anxiety about managing the business remotely, and had comforted me with assurances that they were there to help. They'd positioned themselves as loving support while systematically planning to rob me of everything I'd worked to build. They'd targeted me during pregnancy, when I was physically vulnerable and legally dependent on Ryan for many aspects of our shared life. They'd exploited my trust and gratitude, using my appreciation for their help as cover for their theft. They'd violated not just my business accounts, but my sense of security in my own home, my marriage, and my family relationships. As I documented the evidence of their betrayal, I realized they'd made a critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that a pregnant woman on bed rest would be helpless to respond effectively to their theft. They believed that my physical limitations would prevent me from mounting any meaningful resistance to their plans. They had no idea that before starting StreamlineApps, I'd spent 2 years working for a cybersecurity firm, learning the intricate details of how financial systems could be compromised and how digital evidence could be traced. They didn't know that my contact list included some of the most skilled forensic investigators in Texas, professionals who specialized in exactly the kind of financial cybercrime they'd just committed. The Mitchell family had stolen my money, violated my trust, and betrayed my marriage during the most vulnerable period of my life. But they'd chosen the wrong victim for their scheme, and they were about to discover that bed rest didn't mean helpless. I began making a list of everyone I needed to contact as soon as business hours began. But first, I needed to understand exactly how extensive this theft was and whether other accounts had been compromised. If Kevin had been accessing my computer systems for weeks, there was no telling what other financial information he might have obtained or what additional damage he might have planned. The sun was beginning to rise outside my bedroom window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors Ryan and I had refinished together when we'd first bought this house. In a few hours, he'd return from wherever he'd spent the night, probably with some explanation about helping Kevin with a computer emergency or falling asleep on his brother's couch after working too late. He'd find me awake and waiting, armed with evidence of his family's betrayal and a plan to ensure they faced the full consequences of their actions. The Mitchell family had started a war they weren't prepared to fight, and they were about to learn that underestimating a pregnant woman in bed rest was the biggest mistake they could have made. The baby shifted inside me, a gentle reminder of what I was fighting for now. Not just my business or my financial security, but the future I was building for my child. The family that had welcomed me with open arms had revealed themselves as thieves and predators, but they'd picked the wrong target for their scheme. I was Jessica Mitchell, founder and CEO of StreamlineApps, and no one was going to steal my life's work while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. The investigation was about to begin, and before it was over, the Mitchell family would wish they'd chosen to be the loving, supportive relatives they'd pretended to be instead of the criminals they'd revealed themselves to be. Ryan's key turned in the front door at exactly 8:15 a.m., just as I heard his footsteps on the hardwood stairs leading to our bedroom. I'd spent the past 4 hours methodically documenting every suspicious interaction I could remember from the previous weeks, taking screenshots of the fraudulent transactions, and preparing for this confrontation. My laptop was closed beside me, but my phone remained open to the banking app showing our devastated account balance. "Hey babe," he called softly as he pushed open the bedroom door, assuming I was still asleep. "How are you feeling this morning?" His casual tone, the same warm inflection he'd used every morning for the past 2 years, now felt like sandpaper against my nerves. I watched him approach the bed, noting details I'd never paid attention to before. The way his eyes didn't quite meet mine. The slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he was carrying more stress than usual. The fact that he was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, which supported his story about staying at Kevin's place. "I've been better," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about something important." Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, reaching over to feel my forehead in the automatic gesture he'd developed since my blood pressure issues began. "What's wrong?" Tyler and my business partner Nicole Harper had stepped up admirably, handling day-to-day operations and keeping me informed through daily video calls that Dr. Chen reluctantly allowed. But there's a difference between being briefed on decisions and making them yourself, between trusting others to handle your life's work and maintaining the control that had gotten you this far. Ryan had been incredibly supportive during those first few weeks of bed rest. He'd rearranged his own work schedule to be home more often, bringing me meals and sitting beside the bed while I conducted virtual meetings. He'd insisted that I shouldn't worry about the business, that Nicole and Tyler could handle anything that came up, and that my only job now was to rest and focus on keeping our baby healthy. His family had rallied around us as well, at least superficially. Linda brought homemade soups and casseroles, enough to stock our freezer for weeks. Kevin had offered to help with any technical issues that might arise with my remote work setup, ensuring I had reliable internet and backup systems. Brittany stopped by regularly with books, magazines, and updates on family gossip that she claimed would help keep my mind off work stress. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes in their behavior. Conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room, even virtually during video calls when family members were visiting. Ryan became more protective of his phone, taking calls in other rooms and speaking in hushed tones that didn't carry to the bedroom. When I asked about these conversations, he'd dismiss them as work-related or family drama that wasn't worth worrying about in my condition. Linda's visits became more frequent, often coinciding with times when Ryan was at work and I was alone in the house. She'd bring food and fuss over my comfort, but I began to detect an undercurrent of assessment in her questions about the business. How was StreamlineApps managing without my daily involvement? Were Nicole and Tyler making all the major decisions now? Did I still have access to all the financial accounts and business operations? At the time, I'd attributed these questions to genuine concern about our family's financial security during this uncertain period. It made sense that she'd worry about how a small business would survive if its founder was temporarily incapacitated. I answered her questions openly, even showing her some of our recent financial reports when she expressed concern about whether we'd be able to afford the increased medical expenses that came with a high-risk pregnancy. Kevin's technical assistance had been appreciated initially, but I began to notice that his help sessions lasted longer than necessary and involved more access to my systems than seemed required for simple troubleshooting. When I mentioned that my computer seemed slower after one of his visits, he explained that he'd updated some security software and installed new monitoring tools to protect against the cyber threats that small businesses face. Brittany's visits became more focused on financial topics as well. Having worked in financial planning, she offered to review our personal and business budgets to help us prepare for the increased expenses of parenthood. She seemed particularly interested in understanding our business banking setup, suggesting that we might want to diversify our accounts or explore new investment options for StreamlineApps' growing profits. I'd grown up as an only child with parents who valued privacy and independence, so the Mitchell family's intense involvement in our affairs required some adjustment. But they presented everything as loving concern for Ryan and me during a stressful time, and I was genuinely grateful for their support. Being confined to bed while trying to manage a growing business from a distance was isolating and anxiety-provoking. Having family members who cared enough to involve themselves in our lives seemed like a blessing. The first real warning sign came 3 weeks before the night I discovered our missing funds. I'd been conducting a video conference with Nicole and Tyler about a major project for a new client when my screen suddenly went black. Kevin had been at the house that day, upgrading our internet router and wireless network to ensure I had the most reliable connection possible for my remote work. When I called him to the bedroom to help resolve the technical issue, he seemed unsurprised by the problem and quickly restored my connection. But something about his demeanor felt off. Instead of the usually apologetic scramble to fix an unexpected glitch, he moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what had happened and how to address it. During the brief interruption, I'd heard Nicole mention something about reviewing our financial projections with our accountant Patricia Moore before the call resumed. When I rejoined the meeting, I asked what financial review they'd been discussing. Nicole looked confused, saying they hadn't been talking about finances at all, but rather about the technical specifications for the new client's project requirements. I dismissed the discrepancy as pregnancy brain fog, the mental cloudiness that many women experience during their third trimester. Between the bed rest, the medication for blood pressure control, and the constant worry about the baby's health, my memory and concentration weren't as sharp as usual. It seemed entirely possible that I'd misheard or misunderstood the conversation. But now, staring at the devastating account balance on my phone screen, those small inconsistencies began forming a pattern that I could no longer ignore. The technical problems that required Kevin's increasing access to my systems. The financial questions from Linda and Brittany that went beyond normal family concern. The interrupted video calls and whispered phone conversations that stopped when I came within earshot. Ryan still hadn't returned my calls or messages. I tried reaching Nicole next, knowing she'd be alarmed by any significant financial irregularities. Her phone went to voicemail as well, which wasn't unusual given the early hour, but added to my growing sense of isolation and panic. I pulled up the detailed transaction history on my banking app, scrolling through the entries with increasing disbelief. The money hadn't disappeared all at once, but rather through a series of transfers over the past 2 weeks. Small amounts initially, $500 here, $1,000 there, but escalating to larger withdrawals in the past few days. The final transfer, processed just hours earlier, had drained the remaining balance except for the small amount that triggered the low balance alert. Each transfer was listed as an electronic withdrawal with authorization codes that would typically require either my personal login credentials or physical access to the business banking tokens I kept locked in my desk drawer downstairs. The main checking account isn't the only one that's been hit. My stomach dropped. What else? The PayPal business account, our merchant processing account, and the investment fund we set up for equipment purchases. Someone has been systematically draining everything over the past 2 weeks. I estimate we've lost close to $75,000 total. Ryan had gone completely still, his face pale as he listened to Nicole's report. But again, I noticed the absence of the shock and outrage that should have accompanied such devastating news. Instead, he looked like someone who was receiving confirmation of something he already knew. Have you contacted the authorities? I asked Nicole, watching Ryan's reaction carefully. Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first and make sure I understood the full scope before involving law enforcement. But Jess, this is sophisticated. Whoever did this knew exactly which accounts we had, how much money was in each one, and the security procedures for accessing them. I'm going to have to call you back, I said. There are some things I need to discuss with Ryan first. After hanging up, the bedroom fell into heavy silence. Ryan remained standing by the window, his back to me, shoulders rigid with tension. $75,000, I said quietly. That's not just our business operating funds. That's my employee salaries, our office rent, the money we need to complete current client projects. Someone hasn't just stolen from us, Ryan. They've potentially destroyed StreamlineApps entirely. He turned slowly, and I could see he was struggling with something. I'm sure we can figure this out. Maybe there's insurance that will cover this kind of theft. Maybe the bank will accept liability for the security breach. There was no security breach, I said flatly. The bank's systems worked exactly as designed. Someone used legitimate credentials to authorize these transfers. The question is how they obtained those credentials. I opened my laptop and pulled up the detailed logs I'd been maintaining throughout my bed rest period. I've been tracking every person who's had access to our home office and computer systems over the past month. Would you like to review the list with me? Ryan's face went ashen. Jess, you're scaring me. You're talking like someone in our family might have done this. The phrase hung in the air between us. Our family. Not someone random, not hackers or cybercriminals, but our family. He'd made the connection himself, even as he tried to deflect from it. Your family has had extensive access to our financial systems recently, I said carefully. Kevin upgraded our network security and had administrative access to my computer multiple times. Brittany reviewed our financial planning documents and asked detailed questions about our banking procedures. Your mother has been in the house almost daily, often when I was sleeping or distracted by medical appointments. You're accusing my family of stealing from us? Ryan's voice rose with what sounded like genuine indignation, but I'd learned not to trust my initial impressions of his emotional responses. I'm identifying people who had the means and opportunity to commit this theft. The question is whether any of them had motive. Ryan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd always found endearing but now seemed calculated to appear distressed. This is insane, Jess. My family loves you. They've been nothing but supportive during your pregnancy. Why would you even consider that they might do something like this? I wasn't coordinating anything. I found out about their plan last week and tried to talk them out of it. But they said it was too late to stop, that they'd already begun the transfers and backing out now would leave evidence of attempted theft, without the benefit of actually getting the money they needed. The confession hung between us like a toxic cloud. Ryan had known for a week that his family was systematically stealing from us, and he'd chosen to protect them rather than warn me. He'd watched me worry about managing the business from bed, rest while knowing that our financial foundation was being destroyed by the people I trusted most. You let them do this, I whispered. You knew they were stealing from us, and you let it happen. I tried to stop them, he protested. But they're my family, Jess. They raised me, they supported me through college, they welcomed you into our lives. I couldn't just turn them into the police. So instead you turned me over to them, I said. You gave them access to our house, our systems, our financial information. You provided them with the perfect opportunity to rob us while I was physically unable to protect myself. Ryan's face crumpled. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. They said they just needed a temporary loan, that they'd pay it back as soon as Kevin found a new job and Brittany resolved her mortgage issues. They said you'd never even notice the money was gone if they were careful about the timing. The naivety of the statement would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. They stole $75,000, Ryan. That's not a temporary loan. That's grand theft, conspiracy, computer fraud, and probably a dozen other felonies. And now you're an accessory after the fact because you knew about it and didn't report it. The weight of what had happened was beginning to settle on me fully. This wasn't just about the money, although that was catastrophic enough. This was about the complete betrayal of trust by the people who were supposed to be my family. This was about my husband choosing his birth family over our marriage when faced with an impossible choice. This was about being physically vulnerable, and having that vulnerability exploited by the people who should have been protecting me. But beneath the shock and hurt, something else was building. The same cold fury that had driven me to build StreamlineApps from nothing, the determination that had carried me through the male-dominated tech industry, the refusal to accept defeat that had turned a spare-bedroom startup into a thriving business. The Mitchell family had made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed that a pregnant woman on bed rest would be helpless to fight back against their theft. They believed that family loyalty would prevent me from seeking justice for their crimes. They'd counted on my physical limitations to protect them from the consequences of their actions. They had no idea that my contact list included Marcus Thompson, one of the most skilled cybersecurity investigators in Texas. They didn't know that my previous work experience had taught me exactly how to trace digital financial crimes and build prosecutable cases against perpetrators. They couldn't have anticipated that bed rest would give me the time and motivation to conduct the kind of thorough investigation that would expose not just their theft, but every detail of how they'd planned and executed it. What happens now? Ryan asked quietly. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Marcus's number. Now I call on a professional to conduct a forensic investigation of our systems and trace exactly how this theft was accomplished. Then I contact the FBI's Cyber Crimes Unit and provide them with a comprehensive case file documenting every aspect of your family's criminal conspiracy. Ryan's eyes widened. Jess, please. Can't we handle this privately? Can't we work out some kind of repayment plan that doesn't involve law enforcement? Your family stole $75,000 from us, I repeated. They committed felony theft against a pregnant woman during a medical crisis. They violated our home, our trust, and our financial security. There is no private resolution for crimes of this magnitude. I started dialing Marcus's number, but Ryan reached over and grabbed my wrist. Wait. Please. Just give me 24 hours to talk to them, to see if we can work something out. Because $75,000 is a substantial motive, I replied. And because I've started noticing patterns in their behavior that don't make sense unless they were planning something like this. I described the interrupted video calls, the technical problems that required Kevin's intervention, the detailed financial questions that went beyond normal family concern. With each example, Ryan's protests grew weaker and his demeanor more defensive. You're connecting dots that aren't there, he said finally. You're under enormous stress with the pregnancy and being confined to bed. It's natural to feel paranoid and suspicious when you can't control everything that's happening around you. The dismissal stung because it was exactly the kind of gaslighting I might have fallen for under different circumstances. Pregnant women were often told their concerns were hormonal overreactions, their intuition dismissed as pregnancy anxiety. But I wasn't operating on intuition alone. I had evidence, patterns of behavior, and most importantly, the technical knowledge to understand exactly how this theft had been executed. Then help me prove I'm wrong, I challenged. Let's call Kevin right now and ask him to walk us through every security update he performed on our systems. Let's ask Brittany to explain why she needed such detailed information about our banking procedures. Let's see if any of them can account for their whereabouts during the times these transactions were processed. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed. The careful performance was gone, replaced by something rawer and more honest. "You don't understand the whole situation," he said quietly. My heart rate spiked. "What situation?" "My family, they're going through some financial difficulties right now. Kevin lost his job at the hospital last month. Brittany and her husband are facing foreclosure on their house. My mother's been helping both of them, but her retirement savings are almost gone." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "Are you telling me they stole our money because they needed it?" "I'm telling you that people sometimes make desperate choices when they're facing desperate circumstances," Ryan said. "I'm not saying it's right, but maybe there's a way to handle this that doesn't destroy our family." The carefully neutral phrasing couldn't disguise what he was really saying. He knew about the theft. He might not have participated directly, but he knew, and he was asking me to cover for his family's crimes. "They stole $75,000 from my business," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "They did it while I was bedridden and helpless, unable to monitor my own accounts. They exploited my trust and violated our home to commit felony theft. And you want me to handle this quietly to protect them?" "I want you to consider the consequences of involving law enforcement," Ryan said. "Kevin could go to prison. Brittany could lose her children if she's convicted of a felony. My mother could lose her house if she's forced to pay restitution. What about the consequences for me?" I shot back. "What about StreamlineApps? What about our employees who won't get paid because your family decided my life's work was their personal ATM?" Ryan sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "I don't know how to fix this, Jess. I never wanted any of this to happen. But you knew it was happening," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "That's why you've been staying out late. That's why you've been taking calls in other rooms. You've been coordinating with them." He looked up sharply. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a cybersecurity consultant. He was a former FBI forensic investigator who specialized in financial cybercrimes, someone who'd testified in dozens of federal prosecutions. His involvement would transform this from a family dispute into a formal criminal investigation. My phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. "Just spoke with Tyler and Patricia. The damage is worse than we thought. Client trust accounts have been accessed too. We need to talk immediately." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Client trust accounts contained money that belonged to other businesses, funds we held temporarily during project development phases. If those accounts had been compromised, StreamlineApps wasn't just facing financial devastation. We were looking at potential liability for fiduciary violations, breach of contract claims, and the complete destruction of our reputation in the industry. I called Nicole immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "How much was taken from the client accounts?" $32,000, Nicole said, her voice tight with stress. "But that's not the worst part, Jess. Whoever did this was smart about it. They only took money from accounts for projects that are nearly complete, amounts that might not be noticed immediately because we were already planning to transfer most of those funds back to clients within the next week or two." The sophistication of the theft was becoming clearer. This wasn't desperate people grabbing whatever money they could access. This was a carefully planned operation that demonstrated detailed knowledge of our business operations, project timelines, and client relationships. Someone had studied our financial patterns and identified exactly which thefts would go unnoticed the longest. "There's something else," Nicole continued. "Patricia found evidence that someone has been accessing our accounting software remotely for the past month. Not just viewing records, but downloading detailed financial reports, client contact information, and project documentation." My mind reeled with the implications. If the Mitchell family had comprehensive access to our business systems, they potentially had enough information to impersonate StreamlineApps in communications with clients, vendors, or financial institutions. The theft of money might be just the beginning of a much larger identity fraud scheme. "Have you contacted our clients yet?" I asked. "Not yet. I wanted to understand the full scope before we started making those calls. But Jess, we're going to have to tell them what happened. Some of these are major contracts with companies that require immediate notification of any security breaches involving their data." I closed my eyes, visualizing the chain reaction of consequences this would trigger. Client notifications, potential lawsuits, regulatory reporting requirements, insurance claims, and the near certainty that our professional reputation would be destroyed even if we eventually recovered the stolen funds. StreamlineApps had been built on trust and reliability. Once word spread that we'd been compromised by internal theft, finding new clients would become nearly impossible. Don't contact anyone yet, I said. I have a forensic investigator coming to examine our systems. We need to understand exactly what was accessed and when before we start making notifications that could impact potential criminal proceedings. After ending the call, I lay in bed staring at the morning light filtering through our bedroom curtains, trying to process the scope of what the Mitchell family had done to us. This wasn't just theft. It was the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built over the past 4 years, planned and executed while I was physically helpless to defend myself. The baby moved inside me, a gentle reminder of what was at stake beyond just business concerns. In a few weeks, I'd be responsible for a child who would depend on the financial security I'd worked so hard to create. The college fund I'd been building, the house we'd purchased in a good school district, the stability that would allow me to be present during our child's early years, all of that was now threatened by people who should have been protecting our family's future. A car door slammed in our driveway, followed by footsteps on the front porch. Ryan wasn't expected back for hours, which meant either Marcus had arrived earlier than anticipated or someone else was visiting. The doorbell rang twice, then I heard a key in the lock and Linda's voice calling up the stairs. Jessica, honey, are you awake? I brought you some fresh muffins and thought I'd check how you're feeling today. The timing of her visit, just hours after the theft had been discovered, struck me as remarkably convenient. I wondered if Ryan had already contacted his family to warn them about my ultimatum, or if Linda was operating on her own schedule for some other aspect of their scheme. Come on up, I called, my voice carefully neutral. If Linda was here to assess my knowledge of the theft or to gauge my emotional state, I wanted to give her the opportunity to reveal herself while I observed her behavior. If you call the FBI now, there's no going back. But if we can resolve this as a family matter, maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, the same hand that had held mine during doctor's appointments, and rubbed my back during pregnancy discomfort. The same hand that belonged to the man who had chosen to protect thieves rather than warn his pregnant wife that her life's work was being stolen. Let go of me, I said quietly. He released my wrist immediately, but the damage was done. Whatever trust had survived his confession about knowing of his family's theft had just evaporated completely. He was still trying to protect them, still trying to minimize the consequences of their actions, still prioritizing their welfare over mine. 24 hours, he repeated. That's all I'm asking for. Just enough time to see if we can resolve this without destroying everyone's lives. I studied his face, seeing the desperation there, the genuine fear of what would happen to his family if I followed through with involving law enforcement. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, to consider the impossible position he'd been placed in by their criminal choices. But a larger part of me was coldly calculating the strategic advantages of agreeing to his request. Fine, I said finally. You have 24 hours to convince your family to return every penny they stole, plus compensation for the financial damage they've caused to StreamlineApps. But during those 24 hours, I'm going to be conducting my own investigation into exactly how they accomplished this theft. And if they haven't made full restitution by tomorrow morning, I'm handing everything over to the authorities. Relief flooded Ryan's face. Thank you. I know we can work this out as a family. I know they'll do the right thing once they understand how serious this is. I didn't share his optimism. People who would steal $75,000 from a pregnant family member weren't likely to voluntarily return it just because they were caught. But his 24-hour reprieve would give me time to build an airtight case against them. Time to gather evidence that would ensure their prosecution regardless of whether they cooperated. The Mitchell family had betrayed my trust and stolen my financial security during the most vulnerable period of my life. But they'd made the mistake of targeting someone with the knowledge and connections to fight back effectively. They were about to discover that bed rest didn't mean helpless, and that the pregnant woman they'd dismissed as an easy target was about to become their worst nightmare. Ryan left to meet with his family, carrying my ultimatum and still believing that love and family loyalty might somehow overcome the magnitude of their crimes. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway, then reached for my phone and dialed Marcus Thompson's number. It was time to begin the real investigation. Marcus Thompson answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the alert crispness of someone who started his days early and stayed sharp throughout them. Cybershield Solutions, Marcus speaking. Marcus, it's Jessica Mitchell. I need your help with something urgent and extremely sensitive. There was a brief pause, then his tone shifted to concern. Jess, good to hear from you. How are you feeling? Last I heard from Ryan, you were on bed rest for pregnancy complications. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ryan had been updating our mutual contacts about my health condition while simultaneously enabling his family to rob me. That's part of why I'm calling. Someone has been using my medical situation as cover to steal from StreamlineApps. We're talking about $75,000 in systematic theft over the past 2 weeks. Marcus's intake of breath was audible. Jesus. Are you saying someone specifically targeted you because they knew you were bedridden? That's exactly what I'm saying. And Marcus, this wasn't random cybercriminals. This was done by people with physical access to my home and intimate knowledge of our business systems. I need a complete forensic investigation, and I need it to be bulletproof for law enforcement. I can be there in an hour, he said without hesitation. Don't touch anything digital until I arrive. Don't log into any accounts, don't restart any computers, don't even check email on your phone if you can avoid it. If this is as sophisticated as it sounds, we need to preserve every bit of evidence. After hanging up, I found myself staring at the ceiling, processing the magnitude of what I was setting in motion. Linda appeared in the doorway carrying a wicker basket covered with a cheerful yellow cloth, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She was dressed in the careful casual style she favored, expensive slacks and a silk blouse. That suggested she'd made an effort with her appearance before this supposedly spontaneous visit. You look tired, dear, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Are you getting enough rest? I know bed rest can be paradoxically exhausting when you're not able to move around normally. Her concern seemed genuine, delivered with the same maternal warmth she'd shown throughout my pregnancy. If I hadn't discovered the theft just hours earlier, I would have been grateful for her attention and touched by her continued care during this difficult period. I didn't sleep well last night, I said honestly. I've been worried about some business issues that came up unexpectedly. Linda's expression shifted slightly, a micro-expression of alertness that might have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances. Oh? Nothing too serious, I hope. You shouldn't be stressing about work matters in your condition. Someone has been accessing our business accounts without authorization, I said, watching her face carefully. We discovered it this morning, when Nicole noticed some irregularities in our financial records. Linda's hand went to her throat in a gesture of concern, but I caught a flicker of something else in her eyes. That's terrible. Identity theft is such a problem these days. Did you contact your bank immediately? The response was perfectly appropriate, exactly what an innocent person would say upon hearing such news. But there was something rehearsed about it, as if Linda had anticipated this conversation and prepared her reactions in advance. We're handling it through proper channels, I said carefully. The bank is investigating, and we're bringing in cybersecurity experts to examine our systems. This time, Linda's reaction was unmistakable. A brief tightening around her eyes, a subtle stiffening of her posture, the kind of involuntary responses that indicate someone is processing unwelcome information. She recovered quickly, but not before I'd noted the change. That sounds very thorough, she said. I'm sure they'll get to the bottom of it quickly. These kinds of problems are usually resolved once the proper experts get involved. Her choice of words was interesting. Most people would express confidence that the money would be recovered or the perpetrators caught. Linda seemed more focused on the investigation being resolved, as if she was hoping for a quick conclusion that wouldn't delve too deeply into the details. I hope so, I said. The investigators seemed to think this was done by someone with intimate knowledge of our business operations. Someone who knew exactly which accounts to target and when to access them for maximum impact. Linda nodded sympathetically, but I could see her calculating behind her concerned expression. That does sound like more than just random cybercriminals. Perhaps someone who worked for your company previously? Or a vendor who had access to your systems? She was attempting to redirect suspicion away from people with personal access to our home and family. The suggestion was subtle but clear: look for culprits among business associates rather than family members. The investigators will examine all possibilities, I said. They're particularly interested in anyone who's had physical access to our home office or computer systems recently. Apparently, the theft required someone to bypass several layers of security that would be difficult to overcome remotely. Linda's smile became slightly strained. Well, I'm sure they know what they're doing. You should focus on taking care of yourself and not worry too much about business matters. Stress isn't good for the baby. The dismissal was gentle but firm, delivered with maternal authority that was clearly intended to end this line of conversation. Linda was attempting to redirect my attention away from the investigation and back to my health concerns, positioning herself as the caring family member who was looking out for my well-being. Actually, handling this situation is helping me feel more in control, I said. Being confined to bed rest while my life's work was being stolen was much more stressful than taking active steps to address the problem. Linda's expression flickered. Again. The phrase, was being stolen, placed the theft in past tense, suggesting that I knew it had already been completed rather than assuming it was an ongoing threat. It was a subtle linguistic clue that might reveal how much I actually knew about the scope of their operation. Of course, Linda said. I just worry about you pushing yourself too hard when you should be resting. Perhaps Ryan could handle the business crisis while you focus on your health? The suggestion that Ryan should take the lead in addressing his family's theft was either remarkably tone-deaf or deliberately manipulative. Linda was essentially proposing that the person who'd enabled the crime should be responsible for investigating it. Ryan's been very supportive, I said carefully. But I prefer to handle my own business affairs when they're this important. Linda opened her mouth as if to say something else, then seemed to reconsider. Instead, she reached into her basket and withdrew a container of muffins, setting them on my nightstand with exaggerated care. Well, I won't keep you any longer, she said, rising from the chair. These are blueberry lemon, your favorite. Make sure you eat something substantial today. You're eating for two now. The maternal concern in her voice might have been touching under different circumstances. Now it felt like mockery, the performance of a loving mother-in-law by someone who'd been systematically robbing me while I carried her grandchild. After Linda left, I found myself analyzing every aspect of her visit. The timing, arriving just hours after the theft was discovered. The carefully prepared responses to my mentions of the investigation. The attempts to redirect suspicion and minimize my involvement in addressing the crisis. Most tellingly, her lack of curiosity about the details of the theft itself. An innocent person would have asked more questions. How much money was stolen? When did it happen? Did we have any suspects? Linda's responses had been focused on managing the conversation rather than gathering information, suggesting she already knew everything she needed to know about the crime. The doorbell rang again, and this time I recognized Marcus's distinctive knock from our previous meetings. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, followed by his voice calling out a greeting. Marcus Thompson was a tall, lean man in his mid-40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of intense focus that came from years of examining digital evidence for criminal prosecutions. He carried 2 large cases of equipment and moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar investigations. Let's start with your personal devices, he said after greeting me and setting up his equipment. I need to examine your computer, phone, tablet, anything that might have been accessed or compromised. Then we'll move to your business systems and network infrastructure. I watched Marcus work, connecting specialized hardware to my laptop and running diagnostic programs that revealed layers of system activity invisible to normal users. His movements were methodical and precise, documenting everything with digital photographs and detailed notes that would eventually become part of an official evidence file. This is interesting, he said after about 20 minutes of examination. Your computer has been accessed remotely multiple times over the past month using legitimate administrative credentials. Someone with physical access to your machine installed remote monitoring software that allowed them to observe everything you did in real time. The revelation sent chills down my spine. They were watching me work? More than that. They were recording keystrokes, capturing screenshots, monitoring your email, and logging into your accounts using credentials they observed you entering. This is sophisticated surveillance software, the kind used in corporate espionage or law enforcement investigations. Marcus continued his examination, his expression growing increasingly grim as he uncovered the extent of the digital intrusion. Whoever did this had unlimited access to your business systems for weeks. They could read your email, access your financial accounts, monitor your video conferences, even activate your webcam and microphone to observe you directly. The thought that I'd been under surveillance in my own bedroom, during my most vulnerable moments of pregnancy and bed rest, was almost more violating than the financial theft itself. The Mitchell family hadn't just stolen my money. They'd invaded my privacy completely, turning my home into a surveillance station where my every movement was monitored and recorded. The remote access software is still active, Marcus continued. Which means they probably know we're conducting this investigation right now. But that actually works in our favor, because I can trace the connections back to their source and identify exactly who has been accessing your systems. He pulled up a screen showing network traffic logs, lines of data that revealed the digital fingerprints of every unauthorized access to my computer. The connections are coming from 3 different IP addresses, all in the Austin area. I can get exact locations with a subpoena, but preliminary traces suggest they're residential addresses rather than commercial or public networks. The evidence was mounting rapidly. Not only had the Mitchell family stolen our money, but they'd done so using sophisticated surveillance techniques that demonstrated premeditation and conspiracy. This wasn't a desperate family making a one-time mistake. This was a carefully planned criminal operation that had been in development for months. There's something else you need to see, Marcus said, pulling up another screen. The surveillance software has been recording video and audio from your devices whenever they detected activity. I've found dozens of files containing recordings of your video conferences, personal conversations, and private moments. My stomach turned as the full scope of their violation became clear. They'd been watching me struggle with pregnancy complications, listening to my private conversations with doctors and friends, observing my most intimate moments with my husband. They'd turned my sanctuary into a fishbowl, violating every aspect of my privacy while planning to steal everything I'd worked to build. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. Computer fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, violation of privacy, whatever charges apply. I want them to face every possible consequence for what they've done. Marcus nodded grimly. Based on what I'm seeing here, we're looking at multiple federal felonies. The systematic nature of the theft, the sophisticated surveillance methods, and the interstate aspects of some of the financial transfers put this squarely in FBI jurisdiction. He continued documenting the evidence, building a comprehensive case file that would support criminal prosecution. As I watched him work, I realized that the Mitchell family's biggest mistake wasn't just targeting the wrong victim. They'd left a digital trail so comprehensive that their guilt was undeniable, captured in forensic detail that would make prosecution straightforward. They'd assumed that a pregnant woman on bed rest would be helpless to fight back effectively. They believed that family loyalty would protect them from the consequences of their crimes. They'd counted on my physical limitations to shield them from professional investigation. Instead, they'd given me the time and motivation to build an airtight case against them, evidence that would ensure their conviction regardless of any plea negotiations or family pressure to minimize their actions. The Mitchell family was about to discover that stealing from a cybersecurity professional was the worst decision they could have made. Ryan's 24-hour reprieve was rapidly becoming irrelevant. The evidence Marcus was uncovering would speak louder than any family reconciliation or voluntary restitution. The criminal investigation was now officially underway, and nothing the Mitchell family could do would stop it from reaching its inevitable conclusion. Agent David Park arrived at our house precisely at noon, accompanied by a female agent introduced as Special Agent Lisa Chen from the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division. Marcus had contacted them after completing his preliminary forensic examination, and their response time indicated they considered this case a high priority. Agent Park was a compact man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and the methodical demeanor of someone accustomed to unraveling complex criminal schemes. Agent Chen appeared younger but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd built expertise in the rapidly evolving field of digital forensics. Both wore dark suits and carried briefcases that suggested they'd come prepared for a comprehensive interview. Mrs. Mitchell, we appreciate you contacting us immediately, Agent Park began as they settled into chairs arranged around my bed. Cases like this are much easier to prosecute when victims cooperate fully from the beginning and preserve evidence properly. Mr. Thompson briefed us on his preliminary findings, Agent Chen added, opening a digital tablet. What we're seeing here goes beyond simple financial theft. The surveillance components and systematic approach suggest this was a sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than an impulsive family dispute. I spent the next 2 hours walking them through every detail I could remember, from the Mitchell family's increasingly intrusive questions about our business finances to the subtle changes in their behavior over the past month. The agents took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting documentation to support specific claims. The remote surveillance software is particularly concerning, Agent Chen said. This isn't consumer-grade spyware. The programs installed on your devices are professional-grade tools typically used by law enforcement or corporate security firms. Someone in your husband's family has sophisticated technical knowledge or access to advanced surveillance technology. The revelation that Kevin Mitchell's technical expertise went far beyond basic computer support was troubling but not entirely surprising. His position at the hospital system would have given him access to advanced security tools and training in digital surveillance techniques. What shocked me was the premeditation this implied. Installing professional surveillance software wasn't a desperate act born of immediate financial need. It was part of a long-term plan to monitor and exploit our family. We'll need to interview your business partner and employees, Agent Park said. If the perpetrators had access to client trust accounts and business communications, we need to understand the full scope of potential victims. This could affect multiple businesses and trigger additional federal charges. Nicole arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by Tyler and our accountant Patricia Moore. I watched from my bed as they sat around our dining room table with the FBI agents, spreading out financial documents and computer printouts that told the story of our company's systematic violation. Through the open bedroom door, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Nicole's voice tight with stress as she described discovering the unauthorized access to client accounts. Tyler's technical explanations of our security protocols and how they'd been circumvented. Patricia's methodical review of financial irregularities. That painted a picture of theft far more extensive than we'd initially realized. The client impact analysis is troubling, Agent Chen's voice carried up the stairs. 17 separate businesses had funds stolen from accounts they'd entrusted to StreamlineApps. The liability exposure alone could bankrupt the company, even if all the stolen money is recovered. The weight of that statement settled on me like a physical burden. Even if the Mitchell family was prosecuted and convicted, even if we recovered every stolen dollar, the damage to StreamlineApps' reputation and the potential lawsuits from affected clients could still destroy everything I'd built. They hadn't just stolen our money. They'd potentially poisoned our entire business relationship network. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan, meeting with family now. They understand how serious this is. Working on making things right. Please. Don't do anything irreversible until we can talk tonight. The message's tone struck me as remarkably tone-deaf given the circumstances. The FBI was already involved, conducting interviews with my employees and building a federal case file. There was nothing reversible about the situation anymore. The Mitchell family's crimes had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, regardless of any family negotiations or repayment plans. I heard Agent Park's voice from downstairs. Mrs. Harper, we need you to understand that your cooperation in this investigation is crucial not just for prosecuting the perpetrators, but for protecting other potential victims. If the Mitchell family has used these techniques against Mrs. Mitchell, they may have targeted other families or businesses using similar methods. The possibility that we weren't their only victims hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. People sophisticated enough to install professional surveillance software and systematically drain multiple financial accounts wouldn't limit themselves to a single target. There might be other families, other small businesses, other pregnant women who'd been victimized by the Mitchell family's criminal operation. Agent Chen appeared in the bedroom doorway. Mrs. Mitchell, we'd like to set up continuous monitoring of your husband's communications and meetings with his family members. If they're planning to destroy evidence or flee, we need advance warning. Are you comfortable with us recording conversations that take place in your home? The request felt surreal. My bedroom, the place where I'd spent weeks confined during this difficult pregnancy, was about to become a surveillance center in a federal criminal investigation. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same technology the Mitchell family had used to spy on me would now be turned against them. Whatever you need to do, I said. I want them caught and prosecuted for everything they've done. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. We'll also need you to act naturally when your husband returns home tonight. Don't let him know that we've expanded the investigation or that we're monitoring his communications. If he believes you're still willing to handle this as a family matter, he's more likely to have incriminating conversations with his relatives. The idea of pretending normalcy with Ryan, of allowing him to believe I might still consider protecting his family's crimes, felt like another violation on top of everything else I'd endured. But I understood the strategic necessity. The more evidence the FBI could gather of the Mitchell family's ongoing criminal behavior, the stronger the case against them would be. Marcus spent the afternoon creating comprehensive backups of all digital evidence, ensuring that the forensic data would be preserved even if the Mitchell family attempted to destroy the original systems. He discovered additional surveillance software on my tablet and phone, programs that had been monitoring my location, recording my calls, and copying my text messages to external servers. They've been building a complete profile of your personal and business activities for at least 2 months, Marcus explained as he documented the extent of the digital intrusion. This level of surveillance typically requires either significant technical expertise or access to commercial spyware that costs thousands of dollars. The financial investment required for such sophisticated surveillance suggested this wasn't a desperate family's impulsive crime, but rather a carefully planned operation that had required significant resources and preparation. The Mitchell family had spent money they didn't have to acquire the tools needed to steal money that wasn't theirs, creating a criminal enterprise that demonstrated clear intent and premeditation. Patricia returned from her meeting with the FBI. Agents looking shaken. Jess, the financial impact is worse than we initially calculated. They didn't just steal money from our accounts. They used the access to our systems to redirect several client payments to accounts they controlled. We're looking at over $100,000 in total theft when you include the misdirected payments. The escalating numbers felt abstract. At this point, whether it was $75,000 or $100,000 or even more, the Mitchell family had stolen enough to destroy StreamlineApps and potentially send them to federal prison for decades. They'd crossed every possible line, violating every aspect of trust and legality in their systematic theft from our family. There's something else, Patricia continued. The FBI found evidence that Kevin Mitchell has been using similar techniques against other families. They discovered surveillance software on computers belonging to at least 3 other households where he'd provided technical support services. This isn't just about us, Jess. This is a pattern of criminal behavior targeting multiple victims. The revelation that Kevin had been systematically victimizing other families transformed my anger into something colder and more determined. This wasn't just personal betrayal anymore. This was about stopping a predator who'd been using his technical skills to exploit vulnerable families throughout the Austin area. Nicole sat on the edge of my bed, her expression exhausted. The client notifications are going to start tomorrow morning. I've drafted letters explaining the security breach and the steps we're taking to address it, but Jess, I have to be honest. Some of these companies are going to terminate their contracts immediately. Others are going to demand immediate repayment of stolen funds we don't have. StreamlineApps might not survive this, even if we recover every penny. The possibility of losing the company I'd built from nothing should have devastated me. 6 months ago, it would have felt like the end of the world. But lying in that bed, carrying my child and processing the complete betrayal by people I'd trusted as family, I felt something different. Not devastation, but determination. Not despair, but cold, calculating fury. Then we'll rebuild, I said quietly. We'll rebuild bigger and stronger, with better security and more careful vetting of everyone who has access to our systems. But first, we're going to make sure the Mitchell family faces every possible consequence for what they've done. Nicole studied my expression with concern. Jess, I understand you're angry. Anyone would be. But prosecuting your husband's family is going to destroy your marriage and split your child's extended family permanently. Are you sure this is the path you want to take? The question hung in the air between us. 6 hours ago, I might have been willing to consider private resolution, family mediation, some way to address the theft without destroying relationships permanently. But that was before I'd learned about the systematic surveillance, the professional grade spyware, the multiple victims, the client account thefts that threatened the livelihoods of other business owners. They made that choice when they decided to commit federal crimes against a pregnant family member, I replied. They made it when they installed surveillance software to spy on me in my own bedroom. They made it when they expanded their operation to target other innocent families. This isn't about anger anymore, Nicole. This is about justice. The afternoon wore on with a steady stream of investigators, agents, and technical experts moving through our house. Our home had been transformed into the center of a federal criminal investigation, with equipment set up throughout the first floor and agents conducting interviews in every available room. Dr. Chen arrived for my scheduled appointment at 4:00, seeming surprised by the activity in the house but professional enough not to ask intrusive questions. After checking my blood pressure and examining my condition, she pulled up a chair beside my bed. Jessica, I need to address the stress you're obviously under, she said gently. I understand there are serious family issues happening right now, but extreme stress can trigger premature labor or worsen your preeclampsia. Have you considered that pursuing this situation aggressively might put your pregnancy at risk? The medical warning was sobering, but it also crystallized something important for me. The Mitchell family's crimes weren't just threatening my business or my marriage. They were potentially endangering my unborn child by creating the kind of severe stress that could cause pregnancy complications. Doctor, if someone was systematically stealing your life savings while you were bedridden and helpless, would you ignore it to avoid stress? I asked. Because that's essentially what's happened here. The stress of being victimized is far worse than the stress of fighting back. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. I understand. But I want you to promise me that you'll prioritize your health and your baby's safety above all other considerations. Justice is important, but not at the cost of your life or your child's well-being. After she left, I found myself alone for the first time since morning, surrounded by the quiet hum of FBI monitoring equipment and the distant voices of investigators working in other parts of the house. The baby moved restlessly inside me, as if sensing the tension and upheaval surrounding us. I placed my hands on my swollen belly, thinking about the future I was fighting to protect. Not just the financial security that would provide for my child's education and opportunities, but the broader principle that actions have consequences, that families are supposed to protect each other rather than prey on the vulnerable, that criminal behavior must be met with justice regardless of blood relationships. The Mitchell family had assumed that pregnancy would make me weak, that bed rest would make me helpless, that family loyalty would make me forgiving. They'd built their entire criminal plan around these assumptions, believing they could steal from me with impunity because I was physically unable to defend myself. They had no idea that their betrayal had awakened something fierce and implacable inside me, a protective instinct that extended far beyond my own interests to encompass my unborn child and every other potential victim of their criminal enterprise. They'd targeted the wrong person at the wrong time, and they were about to face consequences they never could have anticipated. Ryan's car pulled into the driveway at 6:30, just as Agent Park was finishing his setup of recording equipment. In our living room, I watched from the bedroom window as my husband sat in his car for several minutes before getting out, his shoulders slumped with what appeared to be exhaustion or defeat. When he finally entered the house, his footsteps on the stairs sounded heavier than usual. He appeared in the bedroom doorway looking older than he had that morning, his face drawn with stress and something that might have been grief. "How did your family meeting go?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral as Agent Chen had instructed. Ryan sat heavily in the chair beside my bed, his head in his hands. "It was worse than I thought, Jess. Much worse. They've been planning this for months, not just the theft from us, but from other families too. Kevin's been using his hospital job to target vulnerable patients and their families, people who were dealing with medical crises and couldn't monitor their finances closely. The confession was being recorded by FBI equipment hidden throughout the room, Ryan unknowingly providing testimony that would strengthen the case against his family. But beyond the strategic value of his words, I was struck by what appeared to be genuine horror at the scope of his family's crimes. "What did they say when you told them about my ultimatum?" I asked. "They panicked," Ryan said. "Especially when I mentioned that you were bringing in cybersecurity investigators. Kevin tried to claim that all the computer access was legitimate technical support, but even he couldn't explain away the surveillance software or the systematic theft from multiple accounts." Ryan looked up at me with an expression of desperate hope. "But they've agreed to return everything, Jess. All the money, plus additional compensation for the business disruption. They're liquidating investments and taking out loans to make full restitution. If we can resolve this privately, maybe we can still salvage our family relationships." The plea in his voice was heartbreaking, but it was also irrelevant. The investigation had already moved far beyond private family negotiations. The FBI was building a federal case that included multiple victims and systematic criminal enterprise charges. Even if the Mitchell family returned every stolen penny, they would still face decades in federal prison for their crimes. "How much did they actually steal?" I asked, curious to see if Ryan would be honest about the full scope of the theft. His shoulders sagged further. "Over $120,000 total, when you include the client payments they redirected and some business credit accounts they accessed using your information. But they swear they can pay it all back within 30 days if you agree not to involve law enforcement." The number had grown again, and I realized we probably still didn't know the complete extent of their criminal operation. The Mitchell family had been so systematic in their theft that discovering every compromised account and fraudulent transaction would take weeks of investigation. "And if I refuse their offer?" I asked. Ryan's face crumpled. "Then they'll probably go to prison for the rest of their lives, and our child will grow up without knowing their grandparents, aunts, or uncles. Our marriage will be destroyed, and our baby will be born into a family torn apart by criminal prosecution and mutual accusations." The emotional manipulation was skillful, appealing to my love for him and my desire to provide a stable family environment for our child. Under different circumstances, it might have been effective. But the recording equipment surrounding us captured every word of his attempt to prioritize family loyalty over criminal justice, adding to the evidence that would eventually be used in court. "Ryan," I said quietly, "your family didn't just steal money from us. They installed surveillance software to spy on me in our bedroom. They've been watching me during my most vulnerable moments, recording my private conversations, violating my privacy in ways that feel almost as criminal as the theft itself." His face went white. "I didn't know about the surveillance. I swear to you, Jess, I didn't know they were doing that." "But you knew about the theft," I said. "You knew they were systematically stealing from us while I was bedridden and helpless, and you chose to protect them instead of warning me." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I made the wrong choice. I know that now. I was trying to protect everyone, but instead, I protected the people who were hurting us and left you vulnerable to their crimes. I don't know how to fix that, Jess. I don't know how to make this right." The admission of guilt was being recorded, adding to the mountain of evidence the FBI was accumulating. But more than that, it represented the end of whatever trust had survived the morning's revelations. Ryan had known his family was committing crimes against me and had chosen to enable them rather than protect his pregnant wife. The baby kicked sharply inside me, and I placed my hand on my belly protectively. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences followed from the choices that had been made, I would ensure that my child grew up understanding the difference between right and wrong, between loyalty and enabling criminal behavior, between protecting family and becoming complicit in their crimes. The Mitchell family's criminal enterprise was about to collapse under the weight of federal investigation, but their greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating my ability to fight back from bed rest. It had been believing that pregnancy would make me willing to compromise on justice, that motherhood would make me prioritize false peace over genuine security. They were about to learn that the protective instincts of an expectant mother, when awakened by betrayal and focused by expertise, were far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The arrests happened at dawn, executed with the precision of a federal operation targeting a criminal organization. I watched from my bedroom window as unmarked vehicles surrounded the Mitchell family homes across Austin, agents moving swiftly to prevent the destruction of evidence or any attempt to flee. Agent Park had called me 30 minutes earlier to provide advance notice, his voice professional but carrying a note of satisfaction. "We're executing search warrants simultaneously at all 3 residences," he explained. Kevin Mitchell, Linda Mitchell, and Brittany Mitchell Santos are being arrested on federal charges of conspiracy, computer fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. Your husband won't be arrested today, but he's being brought in for formal questioning about his knowledge of their activities. The coordination required for simultaneous arrests across multiple locations demonstrated how seriously the FBI was treating this case. This wasn't being handled as a family dispute that had gotten out of hand, but rather as a sophisticated criminal enterprise that required federal intervention to protect multiple victims and prevent ongoing crimes. Marcus arrived shortly after. The arrests began, carrying equipment to monitor any attempts by the Mitchell family to remotely access or destroy digital evidence. "They're going to try to wipe their systems as soon as they realize what's happening," he explained as he set up monitoring software. "But we've been tracking their network activity for the past 18 hours, so we know exactly which accounts and devices they've been using." The irony wasn't lost on me that the same surveillance technology they'd used to spy on me was now being turned against them by federal investigators. Every keystroke they made, every file they accessed, every attempt to hide or destroy evidence was being monitored and recorded by the FBI's cybercrime division. Nicole joined us an hour later, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "The client notifications went out this morning," she reported. "The response has been mixed. Some companies are demanding immediate contract termination and full restitution. Others are taking a wait-and-see approach, especially after I explained that this was sophisticated cybercrime by family members rather than negligence on our part." The distinction was crucial for StreamlineApps' survival. If clients viewed the theft as the result of poor security practices or internal corruption, our reputation would be permanently damaged. But if they understood that we were victims of a systematic criminal operation that had targeted us specifically during a medical crisis, some might be willing to continue working with us once the situation was resolved. "What's the damage assessment looking like?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Nicole consulted her tablet, scrolling through financial projections that would determine whether StreamlineApps could survive this crisis. "If we can recover the stolen funds and maintain relationships with 60% of our current clients, we can probably rebuild within 6 months. If the recovery rate is lower than that, we're looking at potential bankruptcy and liquidation." The stark financial reality was sobering, but it also clarified my priorities. Prosecuting the Mitchell family wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival, both for my business and for the financial security my child would need. Every day the stolen money remained unrecovered was another day closer to losing everything I'd worked to build. My phone buzzed with a call from Catherine Wells, the criminal defense attorney Agent Park had recommended for handling the complex legal issues surrounding the case. "Jessica, I've been reviewing the FBI's evidence file. The case against the Mitchell family is extraordinarily strong. They left digital fingerprints on everything they touched, and the surveillance software actually recorded them planning and executing the thefts. The revelation that their own spyware had captured incriminating evidence was almost poetic justice." "What kind of sentences are we looking at?" "Kevin faces the most serious charges due to his role in targeting multiple victims and installing the surveillance software. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. Linda and Brittany are facing 8 to 12 years each, depending on their level of cooperation with the investigation." The numbers felt abstract until I considered what they meant for my child's future. My baby would be in high school before Kevin Mitchell was released from prison. They would graduate college before Linda ever had the opportunity to meet her grandchild outside of a federal correctional facility. "There's something else you need to know," Catherine continued. The FBI has discovered that Kevin Mitchell was planning to expand his operation significantly. They found evidence that he was researching surveillance techniques for targeting wealthy families during medical crises, vacation absences, and other periods of vulnerability. You weren't just a victim, Jessica. You were a test case for a much larger criminal enterprise. The revelation that my family's victimization had been part of a broader criminal plan added another layer of violation to everything we'd endured. We hadn't been targeted because of personal animosity or desperate financial need. We'd been selected as convenient test subjects for refining techniques that would be used against dozens of other families. As the morning progressed, Agent Park provided regular updates on the arrests and searches. Kevin Mitchell had attempted to destroy evidence when FBI agents arrived at his apartment, but digital forensics experts had recovered deleted files containing detailed profiles of potential victims, including families he'd identified through his hospital work. Linda Mitchell had been found with cash and jewelry that preliminary investigations suggested had been purchased with stolen funds. Brittany Mitchell Santos had tried to claim ignorance about the source of money she'd been laundering, but financial records clearly showed her active participation in moving stolen funds through multiple accounts. The sophistication of their operation became clearer as FBI agents uncovered the full scope of their criminal enterprise. They'd maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking each victim family, including medical conditions, financial assets, family dynamics, and optimal timing for theft. They'd developed standardized scripts for social engineering attacks, practiced techniques for gaining trust and access, and created elaborate cover stories to explain their presence in victims' homes. What struck me most forcefully was the cold calculation evident in their planning documents. My pregnancy complications weren't just an opportunity they'd exploited. They were a condition they'd actively hoped for, a vulnerability they'd waited to develop so they could maximize their theft while minimizing their risk of discovery. They'd literally been rooting for my health to deteriorate so they could steal from me more effectively. Ryan returned home that evening looking haggard and defeated. His questioning at the FBI field office had lasted 8 hours, during which agents had methodically reviewed his knowledge of his family's activities and his failure to report their crimes. While he wouldn't face criminal charges, his cooperation with the investigation would be crucial for understanding the full scope of the Mitchell family's operations. They showed me everything, he said, sitting heavily on the edge of our bed. The surveillance footage of my family planning the thefts, the recordings of phone calls where they discussed targeting other families, the financial records showing exactly how much they stole from how many people. His voice carried a hollow quality, as if the magnitude of his family's crimes had fundamentally altered his understanding of who they were. I keep thinking about growing up with them, about all the family dinners and holidays and celebrations. How long have they been capable of this? How many other people have they hurt over the years? The questions were ones he would probably struggle with for the rest of his life. The people who had raised him, who had taught him right from wrong, who had been present for every important moment of his childhood, had revealed themselves to be systematic predators who exploited vulnerable families for financial gain. The FBI wants me to testify against them, Ryan continued. They said my testimony about the phone calls and family meetings where the theft was discussed would be crucial for proving conspiracy charges. The prospect of testifying against his own family members was clearly agonizing for him, but it was also necessary for ensuring their conviction. Without his testimony, the prosecution would rely entirely on digital evidence and financial records, which might allow defense attorneys to claim the thefts were Kevin's independent actions rather than a coordinated family conspiracy. What did you tell them? I asked. That I needed time to think about it, Ryan replied. But honestly, Jess, I don't know how I can live with myself if I don't testify. Other families are still at risk until these techniques are fully exposed and the people responsible are held accountable. Over the following days, the true scope of the Mitchell family's criminal enterprise became clear through FBI briefings and media reports. Investigators had discovered evidence of at least 17 other families who had been targeted using similar methods, with total thefts exceeding $600,000. Most victims had been families dealing with medical crises, elderly individuals with adult children providing technical support, or small business owners who trusted family recommendations for computer services. The systematic nature of their operation was staggering. Kevin had developed detailed profiles of potential victims, identifying families with substantial assets who were experiencing circumstances that would limit their ability to monitor financial accounts closely. He'd used his position at the hospital to identify patients whose medical conditions might require extended bed rest or limited mobility, then volunteered to provide technical support that gave him access to their computer systems and financial information. Linda had handled the social engineering aspects, developing elaborate personas and cover stories that allowed her to gain victims' trust and extract financial information. She'd posed as a concerned neighbor, a helpful church member, and even a medical social worker to gain access to vulnerable families. Her naturally maternal demeanor had made her particularly effective at targeting elderly victims and new parents who were overwhelmed by their circumstances. Brittany had managed the money laundering operations, moving stolen funds through a network of accounts and investment vehicles designed to obscure the source of the money and make recovery difficult. Her background in financial planning had given her the expertise needed to hide large amounts of stolen money within legitimate-appearing investment portfolios. She'd also recruited additional accomplices, including her husband and several former colleagues, expanding the criminal enterprise beyond the immediate Mitchell family. The revelation that my own victimization had been just one component of a sophisticated criminal enterprise was both horrifying and validating. This hadn't been a desperate family making poor choices during a financial crisis. This had been a carefully planned operation that had been stealing from vulnerable families for at least 3 years before they targeted us. Federal investigators discovered that the Mitchell family had specifically researched my background before targeting us, identifying StreamlineApps as a particularly attractive target because of its substantial cash reserves and my own technical expertise that they believed they could exploit. They'd monitored our family for months before Ryan's marriage to me, waiting for the optimal moment to begin their infiltration. My pregnancy had been the trigger they'd been waiting for. Medical records later revealed that Linda Mitchell had contacted my obstetrician's office multiple times, posing as a concerned family member seeking information about my condition and prognosis. She'd specifically inquired about the likelihood of bed rest and the duration of any activity restrictions, information she'd used to plan the timing of their theft operation. The violation of learning that they'd been monitoring my pregnancy and hoping for complications that would make me more vulnerable was almost worse than the financial theft itself. They'd weaponized my medical condition, turning what should have been a time of family support and care into an opportunity for exploitation and criminal gain. Agent Chen visited regularly to update me on the investigation's progress and prepare me for the eventual trial testimony I'd need to provide. The evidence against them is overwhelming, she explained during one afternoon briefing. But your testimony about the psychological impact of their crimes will be crucial for ensuring appropriate sentences. Juries need to understand that this wasn't just financial theft but a systematic violation of trust that targeted you during your most vulnerable period. The preparation for testimony forced me to confront emotions I'd been avoiding while focusing on practical concerns like business recovery and legal proceedings. The anger was obvious, but beneath it lay deeper feelings of betrayal and violation that were harder to articulate. The Mitchell family hadn't just stolen money. They'd corrupted my sense of safety in my own home, my trust in family relationships, and my confidence in my ability to protect myself and my unborn child. Dr. Chen monitored my condition closely throughout this period, adjusting medications and ordering additional tests to ensure that the stress of the ongoing investigation hadn't triggered pregnancy complications. Remarkably, my blood pressure began stabilizing as the criminal case developed, as if having a clear path forward had reduced my stress levels more effectively than bed rest ever could. There's something interesting happening with your health markers, Dr. Chen observed during a routine appointment. Your stress indicators are actually improving despite everything you're dealing with. It's almost as if taking control of the situation has been therapeutic. The observation made sense to me. The helplessness of being bedridden while my life was being systematically destroyed had been far more stressful than actively fighting back against the people responsible. Having agency in the situation, being able to pursue justice and protect other potential victims, had restored a sense of control that benefited both my mental and physical health. StreamlineApps recovery proved more challenging than anticipated. While we eventually began recovering stolen funds through asset seizures and plea negotiations, the damage to our client relationships was severe. Nearly half of our existing contracts were terminated, and securing new business proved difficult as word of the security breach spread through Austin's tight-knit business community. But adversity also brought unexpected opportunities. Several cybersecurity firms reached out to offer partnerships, recognizing that our experience as victims of sophisticated financial cybercrime had given us insights into vulnerabilities that other small businesses faced. We began developing security consultation services alongside our traditional app development work, helping other companies protect themselves against the kinds of attacks we'd experienced. The transformation of StreamlineApps from a pure development company into a cybersecurity consultancy felt like a natural evolution. Our first-hand experience with digital surveillance, financial theft, and system compromise provided credibility that traditional security firms couldn't match. Clients trusted our recommendations because they knew we understood the real-world impact of security failures. Nicole proved instrumental in navigating this transition, her steady leadership allowing me to focus on legal proceedings and pregnancy recovery while ensuring business continuity. You know, she said during one of our strategic planning sessions. In a weird way, the Mitchell family might have done us a favor. This pivot to cybersecurity is already generating more revenue than our traditional app development ever did. Tyler embraced the security focus with enthusiasm, developing new skills in forensic analysis and penetration testing that enhanced our service offerings. Working on our own case taught me more about real-world cybercrime than any certification course could have, he explained. Now when I'm testing other company systems, I know exactly what to look for because I've seen how sophisticated criminals actually operate. Even Patricia found opportunities to specialize in financial fraud prevention, helping other small businesses implement the kinds of monitoring and protection systems that might have prevented our victimization. She developed comprehensive audit procedures that could detect unauthorized access to financial accounts within hours rather than weeks, potentially saving other companies from experiencing the devastation we'd endured. The federal investigation continued expanding as more victims came forward and additional evidence was uncovered. By the time formal charges were filed, the Mitchell family faced accusations of stealing over $800,000 from 23 separate victims across Texas and neighboring states. The scope of their operation rivaled organized crime syndicates in its sophistication and reach. Media attention intensified as the case developed, with local and national news outlets covering the story of a pregnant woman who'd exposed a multi-state cybercrime operation from her bed rest confinement. The narrative appealed to journalists because it combined elements of family betrayal, technological sophistication, and ultimate justice that resonated with audiences. I was initially reluctant to participate in media interviews, preferring to focus on business recovery and legal proceedings. But Agent Park convinced me that public awareness could help identify additional victims and prevent similar crimes against other families. Your story is powerful because it shows that even sophisticated criminals make mistakes when they underestimate their victims, he explained. Other families need to know that they can fight back effectively against these kinds of attacks, even when they're in vulnerable situations. My first television interview was with a local Austin news station, conducted from our living room while I was still on modified bed rest. The reporter, a woman in her 40s who seemed genuinely outraged by the Mitchell family's crimes, asked thoughtful questions that allowed me to explain both the technical aspects of the theft and the emotional impact of family betrayal. What would you say to other families who might be targeted by similar schemes? She asked near the end of the interview. Trust your instincts, I replied. If family members or friends are asking detailed questions about your finances, especially during times when you're dealing with health crises or other vulnerabilities, pay attention to those red flags. And don't let anyone pressure you to provide access to your computer systems or financial accounts, even if they claim it's for your own protection. The interview generated significant viewer response, with several people contacting law enforcement to report suspicious behavior by individuals who'd offered technical support during their own medical or personal crises. 2 additional victims of the Mitchell family's operation were identified through tips generated by the broadcast. National media attention followed, with true crime podcasts and investigative journalism programs featuring our story as an example of how traditional family relationships could be exploited by sophisticated criminals. The coverage was generally sympathetic to our situation while highlighting the broader implications for cybersecurity and elder abuse prevention. The most impactful media coverage came from a documentary filmmaker who spent several weeks following our story and interviewing other victims of similar schemes. The resulting film, Digital Predators: When Family Becomes the Enemy, premiered at several film festivals and eventually aired on a major cable network. The documentary's most powerful moments came from interviews with elderly victims who'd been targeted by criminals posing as helpful relatives or medical professionals. Their stories illustrated how the techniques used against us were part of a much larger pattern of exploitation that particularly affected vulnerable populations. My pregnancy progressed despite the stress of the ongoing investigation and media attention. Regular monitoring showed that both the baby and I were healthy, with my blood pressure remaining stable throughout the remainder of the pregnancy. Dr. Chen attributed my improved condition to having an active role in addressing the crisis rather than remaining passive. In my experience, patients do better when they feel they have some control over difficult situations, she explained. Your involvement in the investigation and business recovery seems to have provided that sense of agency that's often missing when people are dealing with extended bed rest. The baby was born on a crisp October morning, 3 weeks before my due date but healthy and strong. Sarah Michelle Mitchell weighed 6 pounds, 8 ounces, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with intense curiosity. Holding her for the first time, I felt a fierce protectiveness that made my pursuit of justice against the Mitchell family feel even more necessary and urgent. Ryan was present for the birth, having maintained his cooperation with federal investigators, while struggling with the emotional devastation of his family's crimes. The months of legal proceedings and media attention had strained our marriage, but the arrival of our daughter provided a shared focus that began healing some of the damage. "She's beautiful," he whispered as he held Sarah for the first time. "I promise she'll never have to deal with the kind of betrayal we've experienced. I'll make sure she grows up in a family that protects rather than exploits each other." The commitment in his voice suggested he understood that rebuilding our family would require constant vigilance and transparency, qualities that had been absent from his relationships with his birth family. Trust, once broken by criminal betrayal, would need to be consciously reconstructed through daily choices and consistent behavior. The federal trial began when Sarah was 4 months old, allowing me to return to work part-time while managing both new motherhood and testimony preparation. StreamlineApps' transformation into a cybersecurity consultancy had proven successful beyond our most optimistic projections, with client demand consistently exceeding our capacity to provide services. Nicole had assumed day-to-day operational responsibilities, allowing me to focus on strategic development and the specialized forensic consultation services that had become our signature offering. Companies throughout Texas were seeking our expertise in preventing and responding to insider threats, recognizing that our experience provided insights that theoretical security training couldn't match. The trial itself was a media sensation, with courtroom seats filled daily by journalists, other victims, and members of the public who'd followed the case through news coverage. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Margaret Foster, methodically presented evidence of the Mitchell family's criminal enterprise, using digital forensics, financial records, and victim testimony to build an overwhelming case. Ryan's testimony proved devastating to his family's defense strategy. His detailed account of phone conversations where they discussed targeting strategies, victim selection criteria, and profit distribution left no doubt about the coordinated nature of their criminal enterprise. Defense attorneys tried to portray him as a disgruntled family member seeking revenge, but the digital evidence corroborated every aspect of his testimony. "Did you understand at the time that your family members were planning to commit crimes against your wife?" Prosecutor Foster asked during Ryan's direct examination. "Yes," he replied quietly. "They made it clear that they intended to steal money from our business accounts while Jessica was unable to monitor them closely due to her medical condition." "And what did you do with that knowledge?" Ryan's voice broke slightly as he answered. "I tried to talk them out of it, but when they refused to stop, I made the terrible decision to protect them instead of protecting my wife. It's a choice I'll regret for the rest of my life." The admission of his failure to warn me or contact authorities demonstrated the extent to which family loyalty had been weaponized by the Mitchell family's criminal operation. Even Ryan, who genuinely loved me and our unborn child, had been manipulated into enabling their crimes through misplaced concepts of family solidarity. My own testimony focused on the emotional and business impact of the theft, describing how the systematic violation of our privacy and security had affected not only our family but also our employees and clients. I explained the technical aspects of how the surveillance software had been used to monitor my most private moments, and how the theft had threatened the livelihoods of everyone who depended on StreamlineApps for employment. The defendants didn't just steal money, I told the jury during my testimony. They violated every aspect of trust and privacy that should exist within families. They turned my pregnancy complications into a criminal opportunity, using my medical vulnerability as cover for systematic theft. The defense strategy relied heavily on portraying the Mitchell family as desperate people who'd made poor choices during a financial crisis, emphasizing their lack of prior criminal records and their expressions of remorse. Kevin's attorney argued that his technical expertise had been used impulsively rather than as part of a premeditated criminal plan. But the prosecution's evidence of detailed planning, multiple victims, and sophisticated money laundering made it impossible to characterize their actions as impulsive mistakes. The surveillance software alone required significant financial investment and technical expertise that contradicted any claims of desperate improvisation. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against all defendants. Kevin Mitchell was convicted of conspiracy, computer fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. Linda Mitchell was found guilty of conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. Brittany Mitchell Santos was convicted of conspiracy, money laundering, and accessory charges related to the broader criminal enterprise. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later, allowing victims to provide impact statements before the judge determined appropriate penalties. 17 victims or their family members spoke about how the Mitchell family's crimes had affected their lives, creating a powerful record of the human cost of their criminal enterprise. When my turn came to address the court, I focused on the broader implications of their crimes rather than just personal grievances. Your Honor, the defendants didn't just commit financial theft. They exploited medical vulnerability, violated family trust, and created a criminal enterprise that specifically targeted people during their most difficult moments. Their actions represent a fundamental corruption of the relationships that should provide support and protection during times of crisis. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over numerous cybercrime cases, seemed particularly affected by the systematic nature of the Mitchell family's operation. During sentencing, she emphasized that their crimes required significant punishment to deter similar schemes and protect vulnerable populations. Kevin Mitchell was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison, reflecting his leadership role in the criminal enterprise and the sophisticated nature of the surveillance techniques he'd employed. Linda Mitchell received 15 years, while Brittany Mitchell Santos was sentenced to 12 years. All three were ordered to pay full restitution to their victims, though asset recovery efforts continued as investigators uncovered additional hidden accounts and investments purchased with stolen funds. The sentences provided a measure of justice, but they couldn't restore the sense of security that had been shattered by their betrayal. Trust, once broken by family members who exploited medical vulnerability for criminal gain, proved difficult to rebuild even after legal accountability was achieved. Ryan and I attended marriage counseling for months, working through the complex emotions surrounding his family's crimes and his initial choice to protect them rather than warn me. The process was painful but necessary, forcing us to confront fundamental questions about loyalty, honesty, and the boundaries of family obligation. The hardest part, Ryan admitted during one particularly difficult session, is accepting that I chose them over you and our baby when it mattered most. I can apologize and promise to do better, but I can't undo that choice or erase the consequences it had for our family. The counselor, a woman who specialized in family trauma and betrayal, helped us understand that rebuilding trust would require consistent demonstration of new priorities and values rather than just verbal commitments. Ryan would need to prove through daily actions that he'd learned to prioritize our immediate family's well-being over extended family loyalty. Slowly, we began rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of complete transparency and shared commitment to protecting our daughter from similar betrayals. Ryan severed all contact with his imprisoned family members, refusing to accept their phone calls or visit them in federal custody. The decision was painful but necessary for demonstrating his commitment to our family's security and values. StreamlineApps continued expanding its cybersecurity services, eventually opening a second office in Dallas and hiring additional forensic specialists to meet growing demand. Our experience as cybercrime victims had created unique expertise that proved valuable to companies throughout Texas and neighboring states. The business success felt like a form of justice in itself. The Mitchell family had intended to destroy StreamlineApps through their theft, but their criminal actions had inadvertently created opportunities for growth and specialization that exceeded our original business goals. We were now generating more revenue and serving more clients than we ever had as a traditional app development company. Sarah's first birthday party was a celebration of survival and renewal, attended by friends and colleagues who had supported us through the most difficult period of our lives. Marcus Thompson brought his family, Agent Park stopped by during his off-duty hours, and Nicole organized a gathering that doubled as a milestone party for StreamlineApp's successful transformation. As I watched my daughter play with her toys, surrounded by people who had chosen to stand with us during our darkest moments, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The Mitchell family's crimes had threatened to destroy everything I'd worked to build, but their betrayal had also revealed strengths and resources I hadn't known I possessed. The pregnant woman on bed rest who had discovered the theft 2 years earlier had felt helpless and vulnerable, dependent on others for protection and support. The woman celebrating her daughter's birthday had built a thriving business from the ashes of criminal violation, surrounded herself with allies who shared her values, and created a family environment based on honesty rather than manipulation. The Mitchell family had assumed that pregnancy would make me weak, that bed rest would make me helpless, that family loyalty would make me forgiving. They had built their entire criminal plan around these assumptions, believing they could steal from me with impunity because I was physically unable to defend myself. Instead, their betrayal had awakened something fierce and protective inside me, a determination to ensure that my daughter would grow up in a world where actions have consequences, where families protect rather than exploit each other, and where justice prevails over convenience. As Sarah took her first tentative steps across our living room, reaching toward me with perfect trust and innocent joy, I knew that every choice I'd made during those dark months had been validated. The Mitchell family had tried to steal our future, but they had only succeeded in making it stronger, more secure, and built on foundations that could never be shaken by betrayal again. Their criminal enterprise was destroyed, their freedom forfeited, their legacy permanently tainted by the systematic exploitation of vulnerable families. Meanwhile, the family they'd tried to destroy had emerged stronger, more successful, and committed to protecting others from similar predators. Justice had been served not just through legal proceedings, but through the simple fact that their victims had refused to remain victims, choosing instead to build something better from the ruins of what they'd tried to destroy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.